Hello, everyone. We have an incredible guest on our podcast today, Jonathan Regenstein. Thank you so much for being here. You told
Thank
me
you, Nick.
something very powerful, and
Mhm.
that was that large language model code is like poetry. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Yeah, let's get straight into it. I would love to. I will definitely tell you what I mean about that. Let me give you a little background on myself first, because that'll make it, I think, maybe it makes sense why I said that. So we have this new book coming out, right? Large language models, the hard parts. I've been working for the last 3 years on AI strategy across financial services at Snowflake, as we talked about. So I get to kind of work across all of our large enterprise deployments is super interesting. My ultimate background though is really as coming up through the world of open source, right? So I started as like an old R coder, tons of open source, built everything from scratch, and I've seen this world evolve through machine learning, now AI, now LLMs. And what I meant by that poetry idea was that when I was taught poetry in college, right, my professors told me read every single line of the poem, right? Because the author put it there for a reason. And if they didn't want it to be there, they would have just not included it, right? Or they would have changed it because there's not that many lines in most poems, right? And and that kind of informed our philosophy around this book, which is that large language models are really powerful. They're going to generate code for us. They're going to generate text for us. They're going to help us accomplish all sorts of things. But we really think it's important to like drill down and understand, in this case, with the poetry example, like each line of what's coming out, right? Each of the outputs that's coming from a large language model. It could be a line of code. It could just be a line of text because large language models generate a lot of text. It could be answers to our questions, right? And we kind of feel like that philosophy takes us to what the reason we wrote the book, which is avoiding the pitfalls of deploying these models, right? Like we see them as really powerful tools, only going to get more powerful. They're being deployed across enterprises in all sorts of interesting ways that we can talk about. But we really think if you have this just philosophy of I'm going to read every line, I'm going to read every output, that kind of leads us to how to avoid all the pitfalls that we talk about in the book, right? Where we talk about like, they're non-deterministic, they can give you the right answer but not a safe answer, right? They can give you the right answer but not an answer that's aligned with the values of yourself or your company or your job, right? So that's why we really have that philosophy of like read every line, understand what's coming out, and then test it, evaluate. And then there's a lot of rigor in the book around how to do that. There's this whole ecosystem of tools that's growing up around how to do that too, right? So as models get powerful, now we need other tools to help us work with those models, evaluate those models, take their outputs, do interesting things with them. So it's a super exciting time to be working in this world. And the reason we wanted to write this book about the hard parts of large language models, and the reason we took a very open source philosophy to it, was we really think build from scratch one time, understand everything, and then as the world moves further and further along, you have this foundation to understand the world.
And I know you mentioned that you thought long and hard about including actual code samples in the book. And can you talk a little bit about that? Why actually having that code in the book is so important?
Yeah, for sure. So we did. We went back and forth, how much code should we include? Just a little, just a snippet, everything. And we ended up being very, very inclusive. We included as much of the code as we could in the book. And again, the reason for that is that we see this world where large language models are generating lines and lines and lines of code for us, very powerful applications. They're generating answers to our questions, pages of questions, pages of answers. It can be very easy to kind of just take those and run with it and just click deploy from there, right? But again, we feel like putting the code in the book is just a way to really encourage ourselves and our readers and anyone to read everything carefully, right? To go through it and think about what it is, because the language models are going to give us a lot of output, a lot of answers, a lot of solutions. But we still think, at least for now, who knows where the world is going with artificial general intelligence for now, we think humans need to review and understand this stuff, because when problems arise, which they always do in large enterprise systems and large deployments of technology, there can always be problems. Like really understanding what's happening is important. And so we wanted to put it in print, like in the book, so that our people can, turn off the computer or what have you, and really, it's ironic we're saying turn off the computer working with a large language model, but then like read the outputs really carefully. And I mean, beyond even just understanding the code, so beyond just understanding it, there's of course avoiding all the pitfalls that we talk about. That's like, of course, very, very important. But then reading every line also, it gets you to where you can improve what's happening, right? Because nothing's going to be perfect the first time. Understand how to use those results in the next system. So everyone's talking about agentic AI, which is super, super exciting right now. But one of the things you'll hear with agentic AI, or you can see, is that agentic AI can lead you to just chaos at scale,
Yes,
right?
especially in the regulated industry like
Yeah,
finance, right?
exactly, exactly. So it's an agent talking to an agent talking to an agent. So if you think about like diverging paths, if you get off on the wrong path in the beginning, the agent's just going to take you way afield, right? So like you said, I mean, my job at Snowflake is working with regulated industries, wealth management, asset management, large banks, large insurance companies who have asset managers. For them, even a small deviation from rules, regulations, and policies is a big problem, and a big deviation is an even bigger problem, right? So again, there's probably a world in which a lot of these issues are abstracted away and they're kind of handled automatically under the hood, which is fine as long as everything's going well, right? So some of the things in here I say, well, you don't need these tools and solutions until the day you need these tools and solutions. And that's the day that you're going to probably wish you had them, right? Or you understood them, or you could discuss them and kind of dissect them, right? So we kind of have this first principles philosophy: build from the ground up, use open source tools for these problems, even though there's incredible like off the rack enterprise tools. Understanding it from the first principles is always going to help us avoid these pitfalls, really.
And really designing the architecture around it. I think that's what you're kind of implying is before you, I think it's so easy right now to put something into production. I have people coming to me and they're asking me, oh, I can just, have Claude generate code for me and I can have something in production. And I always challenge them. I said, well, no, that's not the same. Putting something in production requires a lot more work. You have to think about authentication, who has access to your information. How are you going to think about regulations and what can be said and what can't be said? So tell me a little more about maybe when people think about production and putting large language models into production, what should they be worried about?
Yeah, so I'd say there's three big things to worry about in production. One, you've already talked about, which is data. Do you even have access to this data? Is this model supposed to have access to this data? Is the data correct? Right. So this is starting to fall under the umbrella of context, right?
Mhm.
And we talk about context quite a bit in the book, of how data becomes context, how that informs your book. So that's a really important one. Two is the inherent non-determinism in these models. The way they're designed, they pretty much have to be non-deterministic. We talk about how to bring determinism to these models through a few different techniques. But if that's not kind of a front and center concern, when you get into production, you can think of this as, when I ask a question, I expect the same answer to come back if I ask it again, right? That is something that is very, very difficult to do. And it's not like you said, well, I can ask Claude or Codex or whoever to write me the code, build me the dashboard, I have the thing, right? Well, usually someone who's doing that isn't the one who's on the hook when the different answer comes out, right? So
Yeah.
non-determinism is a very big thing to think about. And we go through various techniques for how to bring as much determinism as possible and monitor for determinism. And then third is safety, which kind of gets to your data point a little bit. But safety can be, of course, like your what I'll call, I don't know, egregious safety, where someone's saying, how do I do something evil? That's obviously a
Right.
guardrail that you want to put in. But taking again the bank example, there could be a level of safety of just, is this investment good for me, right? Well, that's not something that a large language model inherently will know. Oh, I should never tell this person to make this investment, right? That's part of the policies, the rules, the procedures that a bank or an asset manager has in place, right? So
Yeah.
that's a little bit subtler, because a large language model might be like, no, this is a great investment. I mean, it's probably going to go way up, right?
Right.
Based on history or something like that. But that doesn't mean it's the right thing to recommend. So that to us was a really interesting, and I'm talking about how I would apply this in my work. In the book itself, these are examples that are very everyday and practical. They're not necessarily focused on financial services, but this is the lens that we brought to this world, which is you need to be able to align your model to give the answers that are safe, again, not just from, oh, don't go build a bomb, but also, hey, at this company, or maybe a lot of the examples we use were in education, right? Like you're teaching kids. There's certain things you maybe don't want to say to kids, but the model doesn't know that it's a kid asking. We have to tell them, right? We have to
Right.
align it to say, hey, this is just a kid. How would the model know a 10-year-old asking a question about history, and maybe there's some things that we don't want to say about history when it's a 10-year-old asking. And that kind of analogizes to aligning to a policy of how we handle questions that have a right answer, but not the answer that is really aligned with what we want to say.
You bring up such an important point, and I've recently had a podcast with someone in healthcare. Radiology is being impacted by AI with scans, human scans being read. And I had just a quick question for you. In finance, it's the same problems. Like, who's responsible? I know you have a JD, and you probably think about it from a legal perspective, but at the end of the day, when AI makes a mistake or makes a recommendation, in your case, to a 10-year-old about a financial investment that they should make, who is responsible for that?
Yeah. Well, ultimately, it's going to be the bank, the wealth manager, the financial advisor who made that recommendation. They're responsible, right? And I think the way we look at this, and we in the first chapter of the book, actually, I believe there might be a little bit of code, but there's basically no code in the first chapter. What we really just talk about here are the big issues to think about, even before we get to pure safety. And I like to say at Snowflake, the first conversation is almost always about why are we doing this with a stakeholder, a commercial stakeholder? What's the business value of this? Because AI costs money. It's not free. So there needs to be a pretty clear business reason. So that's always conversation number one. Conversation number two is with legal and compliance and your regulatory bodies. And there's usually like an AI council that's vetting things. If that conversation hasn't happened with your legal team or your compliance team, you are working on a science experiment right now. It's not going to go into production. It's not going to ever see production level data. If it hasn't gone through the necessary channels for compliance and for legal, you're in an experimental phase, right? So, and again, when you go to have that conversation, there's going to be a lot of questions around safety, accuracy. Have you thought, how have you designed this? What's the data? And that was another kind of lens we had on this book of, well, how do you get through these? How do you talk this language with people who, they have a very different way of looking at this world than probably a builder of these systems does. And it's good to have just thought through and have like a very clear framework for how you walk through determinism, evaluation, safety, alignment, monitoring this as time goes on, because that's another important thing is drift, right? Like things change over time.
What I worry about a lot, to be honest, with all of this is agentic AI. You kind of mentioned it earlier. And this problem of identification versus intent. So someone could identify themselves, oh, I'm a Fidelity agent, right? And then you could let them into your website because, hey, it's Fidelity's very well respected company. I want them to give me advice. Now, this agent could start misbehaving, what I call the intent. You always expect it to do well, but all of a sudden it starts doing activities that are not in line with the company or legal structure. What happens? How do you catch that early enough that it doesn't cause damage to the enterprise?
Yeah, it's a great question. And that sort of idea of granting yourself permission, right? That's a very pervasive problem. So we actually talked through how to do that, how to set up red teaming for those types of things. So you have to really red team your system, which means have a team that's internally trying to basically hack your LLM system, like you just said, with all those various sorts of attacks, and make sure your guardrails are robust against them, right? If you think, so you have to set up the right guardrails around it, right? And it has to be again, that's part of the framework. How are you red teaming this? And it's not, you'll never ever read, a headline in the Financial Times that says we've successfully red teamed our LLM system. It doesn't get any media, it doesn't get any attention, but you're not going to production without it, right? So like, it's a really important consideration that takes as much, not just work, but I would also say like collaboration across your enterprise. One person probably can't build this entire system, right? And in fact, you probably don't want them to, because if you're red teaming, you may not be the best person to red team your own LLM system, right? You might want somebody else to try to. So that's why there's entire enterprise teams that are just focused on this.
And I work in this area a lot. I think people, a long time ago, we could predict a lot of things. And I think red teaming to a certain extent got like 99% of the issues. What I'm seeing now is that with AI, the vector of attack rotates so quickly that it's often hard to catch, even with those types of initiatives. So then I started thinking about trust, and I think it really goes back to trust,
Hmm.
right? To me, red teaming is a very tactical measure that you can should definitely take. But how do you build trust into the system? It reminds me of kind of the 1990s, when we got the internet for the first time and people were afraid to go on the internet. And
Right.
so we had these little trust pilots or trust icons to say, hey, this is a trusted site. You're not giving your credit card information to some bad entity. Do you see something like that coming from a trust perspective?
Well, I think it depends on how we're talking about it, right? So there's kind of internal systems
Hmm.
for that are being deployed. When I say internally, I mean if we're all part of the same organization, could be a school, could be a large bank, could be a radiologist, a large hospital. A big part of trust I find with those is bringing the non-technical people in very early in the process to say, here's how we're building this, here's how we're architecting it, here's why you can trust it. This is not red teaming. It's you guys can stress test it. Like, because with trust on that level, I think of trust the way you just said it as, are these answers accurate? Like that's like level one trust. That's not security level trust, right? That's like, I'll say end user trust is about, are these answers accurate? And that again comes back to like one, deterministic answers. So getting it right one time and the next time not right is definitely going to erode trust.
That's
A
where you got
lot
to
of
read the code like poetry,
yeah,
right? Read
exactly,
every line
exactly.
and see what the interpretation is.
Exactly. And then we get into this almost meta world, right, where we're setting up evaluation systems and we have to evaluate the evaluation systems, right?
Yeah.
Because a lot of the best evaluation systems now incorporate an LLM as a judge.
Mm.
LLM is now another LLM, so theoretically it should be completely subjective in how it's judging this, right? But it is still an LLM, and then you get into this, I guess, like turtles all the way down. Like, where do we stop?
Yeah.
Where do we stop evaluating the LLM that's evaluating the LLM, right? And I think a lot of it really just comes down to honestly having a framework, having metrics that you are going to use as this is trustworthy.
Hmm.
We much like self-driving cars, I think we're going to hold LLMs to a very high standard, higher than humans. Humans make mistakes all the time, and we say, "Well, this is a mistake. Come on, people make mistakes." Yeah, of course, right? If an LLM makes a mistake once, boom, I don't trust it anymore, right? It's like,
Yeah. It's so true. We don't have the same level of tolerance for sure.
correct, which is totally understandable because these systems are powerful. They're doing things maybe we don't understand. So it's almost like more rigor is needed on the evaluation side when you're trying to build trust, as you said, right? People can lose trust in a system without necessarily raising their hand and saying, "I've lost trust in this system." They might just kind of slowly stop using it, which is not a great outcome, of course, for anyone.
Yeah, we want to continue to evolve, and it's evolving so quickly. So tell me more about these trust agents or orchestrating a judge within your ecosystem. What does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down to you have to, of course, have a judge model, right? So there is a one model that you're kind of tabbing as your powerful judge model. It's typically going to be the best model, right? You want a really good model to be your judge, right? Or at least a neutral model, I will say.
Yeah.
Right, right. So that's a big one, right? Is how do you choose that? How do you choose the evaluator, right? Then you need to give the judge criteria, of course. Like what's the task? What's the right answer? What's the wrong answer? That comes back to this almost creating data, like creating validated data, validated answers. Right? We can think of this like labeled answers. I mean, that's again not something that gets a ton of like media attention. Like we've successfully created a big labeled data set of correct answers. But without it, your LLM as a judge is probably going to struggle and you're not going to get to production again, right? So there's all these little intermediate steps that we have to go through, which again, we've tried to go through every single step in this book so that people know like what they need to do. And you can kind of go, of course, take this, use your own creativity, take it to whatever level you want, right? It's more that focus on your question's an excellent one. How do we even think about LLM as a judge, right? Why
Yeah.
are we doing this?
Yeah.
Just having that thought, I think, before deploying puts us way ahead of, or I should say, puts us in good position to avoid the pitfalls that come with not doing that and realizing, okay, I've built my system. Now I'm going to build my LLM as a judge. And then someone says, wait, where's the labeled validated data for the answer? We don't have that yet. Well, yeah, now we got to go build that, right? So it's good to kind of have it all laid out ahead of time.
Is that something that, the book kind of talks about as well, is just how do you think through all those components? Because a lot of times you get started and like, oh, I'll just put code into production and it kind of
Yeah,
tells you to,
we
hold
do.
on a
Yeah.
minute.
we go
Yes.
through each step. We go through again, like we wanted this to be a very accessible book. So we kind of think about how to use open source data sets for this validation, right?
Okay.
For using an LLM as a judge, you can there's a lot of open source data sets you can use for this. So we're trying to give people the roadmap of using an LLM, using open source data sets to do this validation, to set up LLM as a judge. And then of course, it's almost certain for your own application, whether it be at a bank or an asset manager or a school or just your own research, right? You'll have your own data that you need to use. But we are kind of getting the reason we're doing it all open source is that we encourage people to build this on their own. And this is another maybe audience for the book that I hadn't really thought about. But when I talk to like young people, students these days, there's a lot of anxiety around jobs. How am I going to be able to get a job? Is AI going to take my job? And I don't think AI is going to take people's jobs, but I do think we are in a very different job market where standing out is difficult now. And one thing I encourage the students to do is whether with this book wasn't even available when I was recommending this to students. So whether with this book or not, go beyond, well, I've used LLMs because I've used Claude or ChatGPT or I've used the chat interface, right? Like that's like the 99% of people have done that. If you want to be in the 1%, set up your own LLM as a judge system, grab some validated data, choose a project you think is interesting, and have an opinion on how to do that, how to do it better, even if you're not applying for a job like that, right?
Mm.
It just kind of shows that you're going to be adopting this. You're going to be adopting this mindset, this technology, because it's going to change a lot over the next probably 4 or 5 years. But to me, like it really makes someone stand out. Even if you're not like a super technical person, this stuff is pretty accessible now. So it's more like the mindset of, well, I'm going to go that next step, build it myself. Even if it doesn't work, you'll figure out what doesn't work, right? And you kind of have this perspective, which I think is important. Which is another thing I'm hoping people get out of this book is having their own strong opinions about the things that we wrote about, right? I think it's a really important thing to have as you think about your career, where you're going to go in the job market is, well, no matter what you think of AI and all this, whether it's going to take over the world or what have you, having strong opinions around how to deploy this stuff is important, even if the person you're talking to disagrees with you, right? Like it's better than just saying it's great and I've used the chat interface. So that's another audience that I think I hadn't initially thought about, but now that LLMs are they've gotten even more pervasive than I thought they would get. Like everybody's using LLMs, right?
Right.
Everywhere now.
For
So when
all
we
kinds of
started,
use cases, personal and professional.
yeah,
I,
exactly,
I
exactly.
mentor people a lot as well. Women in tech is a passion of mine in terms of organizations. And I hear from students that they're not using AI or they've been told by the schools not to use it, because of
Yeah,
cheating. And I'm always like, just do your own projects. Why are you? Because I feel like we're putting our children behind in many ways by not allowing them to use these tools. So I'm with you here.
yeah, I totally agree. Totally agree. I have 3 kids myself, and I always tell them like, don't use AI for the stuff that your school's told you not to, of course, right? But do use it where it could be useful to you. And when they get a little bit older, I kind of want to teach them, hey, here's like the most effective users of LLMs that I see are experts in their field, 100% without a doubt, right? So can LLMs help you become an expert? Yes, but you still have to learn it. Once you do have expertise, and I know that word expert can mean a lot of different things, but
Right.
maybe if you're just deeply passionate about a field, LLMs are going to make you go so much faster, right? So it's not a substitute; it's like an accelerant to mastering whatever it is that you're interested in.
100%.
Yeah,
And your
it's it.
book should be a great start to that, right? They should pick
Yeah,
it up. Where can they pick up your book?
yeah. Well, everywhere books are sold, but
Right.
so we published this book with O'Reilly, so it's available on the O'Reilly site. It's also going to be available on Amazon starting June 16th. That is the official release date.
Excellent.
So it
That's
is coming.
tomorrow. That's
It's
tomorrow.
tomorrow. It's tomorrow.
Yeah.
This is
We're recording
well
this on June
timed.
15th. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So Amazon, O'Reilly. I'm sure there are other places you can get it, but those are the best places to pick it up.
excellent. Well, this is amazing. Thank you so much for your time today, Jonathan. So many great insights. What is one thing you want to leave our audience with?
Well, the one thing that's a great question. Start using these tools.
Yes.
Start using these tools, and go beyond the chat. I think LLMs are here to stay. They're going to be like a computer. We're going to just use them every day. There's going to be a lot of different types of LLMs, just like there's a lot of different types of computers, but they're here to stay. So enjoy it. You and I talked a little bit about this before we started. To me, this is like one of the most exciting times to be working, certainly in tech, that I can remember. So
It's incredible.
enjoy it.
It's even
Yeah,
more exciting than the internet, and that was
yeah,
pretty exciting.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Have a
Vicki. Appreciate
wonderful day. Appreciate
it.
your
You too.
time.
You too.
Thanks.
Take care.